All right, well, we'd like to welcome you out to our public meeting today to discuss business registration and what that process is going to potentially look like for the city of Chandler. My name is Matt Dunbar. I'm the revenue and tax manager here with the city of Chandler. And Danielle?
My name is Danielle Wells. I'm the revenue collection supervisor.
So we both work in the area that deals with transaction privilege tax as well as licensing for specialty business licenses as well as a potential business registration that we're going to be talking about today. So we do have a slide presentation that we're going to go through. If we have any questions during the presentation, feel free to ask during the presentation so we are sure to capture those questions. We are recording this session so will be available to individuals that can't make it here today if they're interested in viewing the information on business registration. So today's agenda is we're going to cover about 4 different topics. First, we've got our business registration overview, kind of what the process is going to be or why we need it. We'll talk about our stakeholder outreach and give an update on what we've done so far for stakeholder outreach. And then the proposed city code content, the different sections of the code that we've discussed with those individuals and how that's going to affect the businesses in the city of Chandler. And then we'll talk about some of our next steps and moving that process along where we're going to go from here. So first off, we're going to talk about a business registration overview, a little bit about the history of things that have happened recently within the city of Chandler and why this is coming up now. Historically, the city of Chandler has always issued a transaction privilege tax license to all businesses within the city of Chandler. We've done that a little differently than some cities throughout the state in that we have issued them for all businesses, whether they are considered service-based businesses or not, because of use tax obligations or potential tax obligations that they may have. We've licensed every business. Back in 2014, the Arizona State Legislature determined that the Department of Revenue would be the new location for all businesses to file and report and pay taxes to them, and they would take care of the privilege tax licensing for all jurisdictions throughout Arizona. So that was a big change for the last about 3 years. They've been working on that. January 1 of this year finally went into effect. So there's a transition time this year. Many of the businesses already know that. They've been affected by it. The major intent of that legislation was to make it easier to file and pay privilege taxes in the state of Arizona. One location that you have to file and pay to the state of Arizona for all jurisdictions. For our larger companies, that includes they had to file not only for the state, but they would file to Chandler and Mesa and Phoenix and Tempe and Prescott and Flagstaff and most of the larger cities in Arizona. So this makes it easier for them as they now have one location to file their taxes. But what that does is it creates a little bit of a difference in how businesses are now licensed in the city of Chandler. Whereas before we licensed all businesses with the transaction privilege tax license, the state does that and they follow different guidelines as far as who they license or who's required to get that license. And they only license taxable activity. Whether or not there's a potential use tax obligation, they don't take that into consideration. If there's a privilege tax, that's when they license that business. So there's a distinct change in how we're treating those types of businesses. Also, before, when it was the city of Chandler doing the licensing, all of that information, all of that data was owned by the city of Chandler. That was our data. We followed our specific guidelines for confidentiality of taxpayer information, which are different than what the state or how the state treats that data. So that's one of the other distinctions that really caused a need for some other method to gather business data was as the state is now in control of that data, they limit who we can or can't share that data with and what data fields are shareable. So basically one of the main issues we have with that data is we typically share out business lists, new registration lists with internal city departments, economic development, police, fire, transportation and development. So those different groups would get lists of new businesses for verification purposes of code compliance in different areas. We can no longer share new business lists because the new businesses coming from the state, that data is now confidential information. Even though it's data that is posted on a wall at a business, the state still considers that their data, and we can only share it with tax administration. So those other departments are now excluded from getting access to that data. It also excludes any of the public record requests we used to get from different businesses that wanted to send out mailing lists or potential marketing material to businesses in Chandler. They would get the new business list as well as complete business lists and be able to market or send information or track those different businesses. And that's no longer available as that data is now considered confidential at the state level. So that created kind of a disconnect. So this next slide shows the kind of a graphic of the number of licenses. This excludes our residential rental folks, and we'll talk a little bit about why they're excluded from this graph in a little bit. But this is a total number of businesses, an estimated total number of businesses before the state transitioned was just about 18,000 businesses in the city of Chandler that we were able to have their information, their data, which included just over 5,000 service-based businesses. When the state took over, those 5,000 were then told by the state they no longer needed a TPT tax for Chandler. So they are currently unlicensed, and we don't have them on a registry. We don't have their business information. So there's kind of a disconnect with that customer data. And so the intent with the business registration, our hope is to be able to bring that back up to the total number of businesses in the city of Chandler. So we have a list of taxable businesses as well as tax exempt businesses. With that, Danielle's going to talk a little bit about some of the benefits to the business registration for the community as a whole.
So we felt that we have some community benefits to proposing a business registration in the city of Chandler. One of the ones that we kind of already touched on it is we're limited to share the data internally and externally. And so we feel that with a business registration, we would have the ability to share the demographic data and the information to our internal departments, economic development, police, fire, planning, and then also to our external partners, the chamber, and other public information requests that we get. So we see a benefit in providing the opportunity to collect our own data and share that data. The other one is it provides a means for us to verify the taxable businesses are licensed to pay tax dollars in the city of Chandler. And so this is going to benefit the community as a whole for us to have that opportunity to make sure that we're kind of cross-referencing those lists and verifying the taxable businesses are also licensed with the state as well to pay that. And then, of course, that brings in our low-cost services that we've always been able to provide for the city to be able to continue to do that. So we really do see two good community benefits to implementing this.
All right. So some of the business benefits we talked about with some of our stakeholders. There's definitely a benefit, and I think the stakeholder group meetings that we held kind of showed that there is concern about ensuring kind of a level playing field for all taxpayers, ensuring that information is available when needed. So some of the benefits of the business registration would be a reduction in fees previously paid for businesses. So businesses in Chandler that were licensed with a transaction privilege tax license, going forward with the combination of the transaction privilege tax license at the state level and the business registration, we'll see a slight reduction in fees, and we'll discuss the specific fees coming up here in a second. But also the validation of business presence in the community for reasons such as opening bank accounts, customer confidence, and customer issues as well. So one of the key benefits, a lot of the smaller mom and pop type operations, they won't have an LLC or a corporation, so they won't have those types of documents to bring to a bank to open a bank account for their business. So when they receive a check for the name of their business, they won't be able to deposit those checks. So typically they turn to the city to say, I need to get a business license because that's what the bank's asking for. In the past, they've been able to use their transaction privilege tax license to provide proof that they are in business and this is the business name and that Chandler is accepting of that business. For the service-based businesses, they no longer can do that. The taxable businesses will still get that license at the state level, but the service-based businesses won't be able to get that at the state level. It also provides a method for the city to communicate other city code chapters that they need to be aware of. So if a business were to come in today, and not a business that doesn't need a license today won't get information on code requirements, fire inspection, alarm permitting, those types of things that we can share with businesses that do come in. So this provides us an opportunity to have a conversation with businesses, new businesses coming in, to make sure that they're aware of the different code requirements that their business may be required to follow. It also allows for that business information database to be available online so that our internal and external partners have access to that data. We currently, or in the past, in 2016, we shared that data online, all the new businesses. There's a list available online that anybody could go and download and get that information. And since the state took over, we've been unable to share that. So this would allow us to do that again. And then also it maintains that complete list of businesses in the city of Chandler, which is really one of our hopes, is to have that complete list, because that helps a lot of different departments throughout the city. And like Danielle said, it helps us to kind of cross-check the TPT license verification, which is the last one on this slide. Really levels the playing field. One of the concerns that many business owners have is if they're competing in the market in Chandler, they want to ensure that the playing field is level, that if I have to collect and pay the tax, that my neighbor is also collecting and paying the tax. And this really allows us to kind of have that cross-check. So we can have our own list that we have complete control over, and we can verify that all of those businesses that have taxable activity are indeed licensed with the state and reporting Chandler taxes at the state level, so that we have that cross-check. Otherwise, we're just relying on the state only. Yes? Yeah, so first off, let me repeat the question so that they can pick it up on the recording. So the question was, why is it that the state, looking at the same data that we used to collect and deem as not confidential and able to share, why is it that they deem that information confidential? They should be using the same kind of criteria for what is or what isn't confidential. Is that the gist of your question there? So really the answer is we follow the Model City Tax Code when we're dealing with the confidentiality of taxpayer information, which is a separate code outside of what the state follows. They follow Arizona revised statutes. They also have additional requirements because within their system, they also house federal tax information because of state income and federal income reporting requirements, luxury tax information, which follows different criteria. So because all of their taxes are kind of housed in one area, they treat all taxes as the most confidential. That's what they treat all of their taxes as. So pretty much those are the federal guidelines for confidentiality as set forth by the state. So in order to make sure that they comply completely with all requirements for confidentiality, they take the most stringent standard and they meet that. And so that's why they're different than what the city has traditionally treated these taxpayers. We only have to follow the Model City Tax Code. All right, so we're going to talk about the stakeholder outreach and give an update on what that entailed.
Thank you. Okay, so we did go ahead and meet in July with stakeholder groups on the proposed business registration code. And what we did was we selected some groups of businesses types that helped us formulate some of the code. Our purpose was to formulate some code and get some feedback from our stakeholders. We invited retail businesses, hotels, internet type businesses, mobile businesses, commercial rentals. And we also looked at the types and sizes. So we looked at small, medium, and large type businesses, as well as different entity types, sole proprietors, LLCs, corporations, and partnerships. And we really sat down. We had 2 separate meetings, and we met with them and drafted some proposed language from that meeting. So our purpose was to develop some code language on specific criteria. And what we really wanted to do was have the least impact on our city businesses. So we really wanted to get that outreach first. So our goal was to discuss the content areas to develop the code language. And what we did was we went over with them 6 content areas specifically, and we're actually going to be working through those with you guys in the next slide or 2. So the first one was who needs to be registered. We really wanted to hunker down on what we wanted to see as far as who wanted to be registered, those that needed to be exempt from the registration, how to treat multi-businesses that have different locations and campus styles, what to do about those that don't comply with the registration, the fees and the duration, and the registration, if it should be transferable, displayed, those types of things. So we really met with them and went over these 6 code contents, and we're going to go over them in detail with you now.
All right, so that first one is the actual who will need to be registered. We spent probably the majority of the time focused on this area of who needs to be registered. Really, the number one criteria there is all persons engaging in business within the city uh, from a fixed location, and then except those that are specifically exempt. So we do have some exemptions. We'll talk about those exemptions, who is and who isn't required to. But for the most part, if you have a brick and mortar physical location in the city of Chandler, you would be required to have a business registration, and that would capture the majority of businesses that we want to have their information. So physical brick and mortar, this includes vacation rentals. So vacation rentals are those that are less than 28 days. It's a week at a time or a weekend at a time. Those types of rental properties do need to be licensed or registered with us should business registration pass through the council. Commercial rental property owners, so not only the grocery store in a strip mall, but also the owner of the strip mall. So we have the demographic information on who owns commercial property in the city, as well as who is renting that commercial space and for what purposes. The umbrella business models. So these are like our insurance companies, hair salons, where really the intent is to license the business, that physical location, but not necessarily the individuals within that location. So if there are 30 agents that sell out of an insurance company's office, we want to make sure we have the information on that commercial location, that it's an insurance company, not necessarily all 30 agents. And then internet business based in Chandler. So if I run a business online, but I run my business from a Chandler location, even if that location is my home, they would be required to register with us. Home-based or mobile businesses where the home or office is located in Chandler. So if I have a mobile pet grooming trailer that I tow around, even if I rarely come into Chandler, if my home is based in Chandler, that would be a demographic information that we would want for a home-based business. No matter where they're traveling throughout the valley for their mobile business, they'd be housed here in Chandler. And then kiosk and vending type businesses, we'll talk specifically about how we treat them a little differently, but we also wanted to incorporate them.
The next is exemptions. What we wanted to do was kind of identify those that we didn't necessarily need to get that demographic information with. And the first one was our independent sales representatives. And these are the independent sales representatives that work underneath a parent company. If that parent company happens to have its corporate office in Chandler, we would go ahead and register that parent company, but we wouldn't necessarily need to register all the independent sales representatives underneath that parent company should that parent company be especially outside of Chandler. So those small independent sales representatives where we'd like to exempt. Persons engaging in individual lessons or tutoring from a non-commercial location, this really is our swim lessons from the home, piano lessons from the home. We're not interested in registering those as being required to be registered with the city of Chandler. Businesses already licensed with a specialty license, and what I mean by that is those that are already licensed with us with a different permit, such as a massage establishment, peddlers, or a mobile food unit. We really already have that information, name, owner, all of that. There's no need for us to register separately, have a separate registration for those groups because we've already gathered that data. And so we're not looking at registering those that have already got a specialty license. In addition to that, those that fall under our special events, we have a lot of special events in Chandler, Ostrich Festival, Barbecue Festival, and those that are registered underneath there as vendors, we're not interested in getting a registration for those as well. We're looking at exempting those as well because we already really have that list of vendors when we do actually set up the special event, and so there's no need for them to get a separate registration for that. Casual sellers, this is our garage sales, the eBay sales that do just like one-offs, two-offs, three-offs. And what we did was we capped that out at 4 or fewer sales. So if you're in the business of gathering used items and then going and selling them on a regular basis through a business, now you're in a business type situation, and we would like to get you on our registry. But for those that just do casual sales, we're not interested in including them in our registry. Groups that we have actually been precluded by from state statute. So we actually do have a set of individuals that, or set of types of businesses that we are precluded from registering, such as our livery businesses, our insurance agents, real estate brokers, food sold by growers or agricultural folks, government offices, and residential rentals. So the state has actually mandated that we do not register any other business registration with our residential rentals. So they'll just have their license with for tax with the state.
And really
Go ahead.
that, we want to just make that distinction between what is residential rental versus our hotel motel type transactions. Fewer than 28 days falls under the hotel motel taxable classification, and also would be required to register with us because that falls under a separate tax classification that is not exempt from the business registration requirements. So really it's just residential rental that's exempt at the state level, but if you're fewer than the 28-day state statute number, then you fall into a different category and you are required.
So we'll pause here for a second. Did anybody have any questions about the exemptions?
So livery vehicles, Uber, Lyft, your taxis, limo services, those folks are exempt under state statute. So some people out there watching for their viewing pleasure may wonder what livery is, and that's what it is. So, all right, so we'll get into the next. Oh, you've got one more little area.
One more.
Yep.
How to treat multi-location businesses. So campus-style businesses, businesses that are in a more of a campus style. They have multiple buildings, but they're really just one business. We would like to only register them with one registration. We don't feel the need to license every single building when the business is already getting registered. So that's our proposal. And then additionally, the vending and kiosk style businesses, the red boxes and those types of styles, we would like to have one registration for those with a list of all the locations underneath. We don't see the need of charging and collecting data on all the different registrations and getting licenses or registrations in all the locations over the city. So that's our proposal on that. Any questions on that? Okay.
Okay. So our next section here is some code content dealing with businesses that fail to comply. Typically and historically, with a transaction privilege tax license, those that failed to comply, there was a penalty of 50% of the licensing fee, and that's also the proposal for the business registration. So if someone were to fail to comply with a request to get registered, when they do register, then there would be an additional penalty associated with that of 50% of the total license fee. There would be an ability to request a waiver of that penalty if there was some reason specific that they could not become compliant with the registration requirement. We would be able to waive that fee and adjust the penalty off for hardship. And then also we talked about what the fee should be and what the duration should be. The goal was initially to reduce the costs associated with registering or licensing businesses in the city. So we're actually proposing changing the transaction privilege tax license fee that is currently $50. That would go down to $2, which would mirror the same fee that we have for our residential rental properties. So all TPT licenses at the state level would have the same fee of $2. And then there would be a new business registration fee of $45. So a taxable business, the net cost to them would be $47, which is down from $50. The cost for a non-taxable business would be $45. Historically, they've paid the $50 TPT license fee as well. So that was taken into account, and there was a slight reduction for those fees. We did want to exclude some individuals from paying that fee, so our federally recognized nonprofits would not be required to pay the fee. They just provide us with their 50C designation from the IRS, and we're able to exclude them from the registration fee. It would be an annual fee that would be renewed in January. So the end of December, that the renewal notices would go out. January 1, calendar year, would be the registration time period. And then the initial annual fee would be prorated. So depending on when the business were to come in and apply or for registration, it would be prorated on a quarterly basis at either 100, 75, 50, or 25% of the actual $45 registration fee, depending on when they came in. Any questions on the fees? All right. sure we get all of our content up here. One more. All right. So should the registration be transferable and displayed? In our stakeholder group, the consensus was yes, it should be transferable between locations, but not between owners. So we do have that if company A moves from suite 1 across the street to another location, they will just transfer over to that location. They don't have to reapply and go through the process again. Their licenses or their registration is good for that location. But if they were to sell to a new owner, the new owner would have to come in and re-register because all that information would be net new information we want to gather on the new ownership. If they were to make a change, we request that within 30 days they would notify us of that change. The intent is to have a way to do that online so it's as easy and business friendly as possible, that the application eventually will be online, easy and business friendly as possible. The renewal process as well, the payment of the renewal, all online so that our businesses are easily able to access that information and get that done. Some additional items that came up through our stakeholder meeting are listed here. They wanted some electronic exchange of the business data. We are considering a new licensing software for our specialty licenses that would also allow us to handle the business registration process, and that does allow for electronic transmittal of the information throughout the city to other departments. Create an easier environment to open businesses in Chandler, including an automated process between departments. That licensing solution would allow us to do that as well. And then offer an opt-out feature for businesses that do not want to share specific data. So that's one of the concerns that some of the businesses had, was if this data is going to be shared online, what if for some personal reason or some business reason we don't want our information shared? We'll be able to find some specific information pieces that we can exclude from the online information piece, so it's not shared there. And then allow for non-Chandler-based businesses to register if they want to be part of the database. So what we also found interesting in that discussion was that businesses really saw the benefit to being registered with the city of Chandler, to be kind of considered a legitimate Chandler business and to have that stamp of approval, if you will. So they also thought that there are other businesses that may want to do that even though they're located outside the city of Chandler. Mobile businesses, for example, that were to come into Chandler, but they want to be able to be on that register, that list, so that others can find their business and see that they're a legitimate Chandler business. So we did provide a provision in the code that would allow non-required businesses to register if they should so desire.
Just a couple more items that we did discuss with the stakeholder group. We want to ensure that we have an online application and renewal process, sticking with the technology theme. We also want to ensure that we get an email renewal notification so that it's easier and more friendly for the business, and the ability to print the business registration certificate online. So really moving towards that. And lastly, one of the additional items that's going to be very important is to make sure that we educate that business community of the registration process, what they need to do, and walk them through the changes. And so we'll make sure that we get that done as well. And of course, all of the proposed business registration city codes discussions were incorporated from the stakeholder feedback. Any questions? So here's our timeline and sort of our next steps. We're here on October 5th discussing with you at the public meeting on business registration code. So that's today. Tomorrow, we actually want to post the business registration fees on the website for 60 days. That does have to be posted because it is a fee change for 60 days. The first read for council, we like to put that on the October 19th agenda. And then the second read, because it is a new code and a change, then we would have that go through 2 reads, the second one being October 9th. And the registration and licensing system that we're looking at to house this data and to manage this data also on November 9th to council. And then council action on new business registration fees on December 7th. So if passed and if the proposed draft is passed by council, we're looking at outreach for the majority of December, looking at the community outreach, education, requesting the taxpayers to update some information, excuse me, the business owners to update the information and potentially help them through the business registration process. And then we are looking at implementing January 18th, January of 2018.
All right, so we do have some copies of the code in the hall if you're interested in taking a copy of the draft code with you to peruse at your leisure and read to your kids at bedtime. It's great reading, but it does provide, it goes through all of the steps that we've talked about, all of the different requirements that we've talked about. We'll also have it available online so people can look at it and provide feedback. Um, but that information is there. And with that, we'll open it up to any additional questions that you have about the business registration process.